Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the biggest space fleet he had ever seen. 12 different alien races had joined together to fight against their common enemy. For 3 long years, humans had fought side by side with these aliens against the Vex Empire, a group of conquerors who wanted to control the entire galaxy. Jake looked out at the stars and felt proud. His people, the humans from Earth, had proven themselves to be excellent fighters. When other species gave up, humans kept fighting. When battles seemed impossible to win, humans found a way. The aliens had learned to respect human courage and clever battle plans. Admiral Lisa Grant was in charge of the whole fleet from her flagship. She had worked hard to build trust with the alien commanders. The insect-like klaxon respected human determination. The crystal beings called Yorth admired human creativity. The water-loving Neridians liked how humans never broke their promises. All these species had come to see humans as valuable friends and allies. Captain Rick Hayes had discovered something terrible on a dead planet called Korath Prime. His scouts found a huge Vex weapon factory hidden there. The weapon being built could destroy entire star systems with one shot. If the Vex finished building it, they would win the war and enslave everyone in the galaxy. The Alliance leaders met to discuss what to do. The alien commanders looked worried. This weapon could not be allowed to exist. They had to attack the factory and destroy it before the Vex could use it. A mission would be dangerous, but it was their only chance to end the war. Jake Morrison volunteered his ships for the most dangerous part of the attack. Humans would lead the assault on the heavily defended factory, while the aliens provided support. It was a risky plan, but Jake believed in his people and trusted his alien allies completely. Admiral Grant gathered all the human ship captains for a final meeting. She explained the battle plan carefully. 60 human ships would attack the main defenses, while the alien fleet would block escape routes and provide covering fire. It was the biggest battle humans had ever fought, and everything depended on perfect teamwork. Captain Amy Rodriguez felt nervous but excited as she prepared her squadron. Her pilots were young but brave. They had trained for months with alien flight patterns and communication systems. Everyone knew their job and trusted their allies to do theirs. The fleet moved toward Korath Prime like a massive metal cloud. Jake watched the alien ships take their positions exactly as planned. The klaxon ships formed perfect geometric patterns. The Yorth vessels sparkled like deadly jewels. The Neridian ships moved through space like schools of metal fish. Everything looked perfect. As they approached the target, Captain Hayes sent his scouts ahead to check for traps. The Vex were known for their tricks, but the alien allies had assured the humans that their intelligence was perfect. The factory was defended, but not more than expected. The attack could succeed if everyone did their part. Jake felt his heart beating faster as they got closer to battle. He thought about his family back on Earth and all the human colonies counting on them. This battle would decide if humans had a future in the galaxy, or if they would become slaves to the Vex Empire. The alien fleet commanders sent final messages of encouragement to their human allies. Commander Zektar of the Klaxon promised that no human ship would fight alone. The Yorth leader sang a battle song that meant victory through unity. The Neridian admiral pledged that the waters of their homeworld would remember human bravery forever. Admiral Grant gave the order to attack. Human ships surged forward toward the Vex defenses like arrows shot from a bow. Jake watched his brave pilots fly into danger, trusting that their alien friends would protect them from behind. The Vex defensive weapons opened fire. Bright energy beams and explosive missiles filled the space around Korath Prime. Human ships danced between the attacks, firing back with everything they had. Some ships took damage, but they kept fighting. This was what humans did best. Jake looked at his sensor display and saw something that made his blood freeze. The alien ships were not firing. They were not moving to help. Instead, they were slowly backing away from the battle. He tried to contact Admiral Grant, but her ship was too far ahead. Deep in the fighting, Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, filled with confusion and fear. Her squadron was surrounded by Vex ships, but the escape route that should have been kept open by their allies was blocked by enemy vessels. The aliens had promised to guard that route, but they were nowhere to be seen. Then Jake heard the words that would change everything. Commander Zektar's voice came over the communication channel, cold and without emotion. Humanity has served its purpose. Your species was always expendable. Goodbye. The alien fleet turned and jumped away, leaving 60 human ships trapped and surrounded by an enemy that had been waiting for exactly this moment. Jake realized with horror that they had not walked into a Vex trap. They had walked into a trap set by their own allies. The betrayal was complete and devastating. The journey back to Earth felt like the longest trip Jake Morrison had ever made. Only 18 human ships had survived the trap at Korath Prime. 42 ships and thousands of brave humans were gone forever. The surviving vessels were badly damaged, their hulls torn by enemy weapons, and their crews wounded in body and spirit. Captain Ben Clark's ship barely made it home. The engines were failing, and half his crew was dead or injured. But he carried something more important than his own life. He had recorded everything that happened during the battle, including the alien communications that proved the betrayal. Dr. Helen Murphy worked day and night in the intelligence center on Earth. She was a smart woman who had spent her life studying alien languages and cultures. Now she used those skills to uncover the most horrible truth in human history. The aliens had been planning to betray humanity for months. The intercepted messages told a story that made Helen sick to her stomach. The Alliance had made a secret deal with the Vex Empire. The war that humans thought they were fighting for freedom was actually a lie. Humanity had been used as soldiers to kill Vex leaders who did not want to make peace with the Alliance. President Robert Hayes called an emergency meeting of the Earth Defense Council. The room was filled with military leaders, scientists, and politicians who had trusted the aliens completely. Now they sat in stunned silence as Helen Murphy explained what she had discovered. The betrayal was worse than anyone had imagined. Human technology had been stolen and given to the Vex. Battle plans that humans thought were secret had been shared with the enemy. Even the locations of hidden human colonies had been sold to the Vex in exchange for the Alliance's safety. Every human victory had actually helped the aliens achieve their real goal. When humans destroyed Vex warships, they were really eliminating Vex commanders who opposed the peace deal. When humans captured Vex territory, they were clearing the way for Alliance expansion. Humanity had been fighting their own death sentence, and never knew it. Colonel Steve Parker stood up to give his report. He was one of the few soldiers who had survived the massacre at Korath Prime. His uniform was still torn and bloodstained, and his eyes burned with anger that seemed to light up the whole room. Steve told them about the final moments of the battle. He had watched helplessly as Vex ships destroyed human vessels one by one. The aliens who were supposed to be their friends had not only abandoned them, but had also provided targeting information to make the slaughter more efficient. The Klaxon had used their advanced computers to calculate the best ways to trap human ships. The Yorth had used their crystal technology to jam human communications. The Neridians had provided detailed maps of human ship designs, so the Vex would know exactly where to aim their weapons. Dr. Murphy showed them more evidence that made everyone's blood boil. The aliens had been laughing about human deaths in their private messages. They called humans useful idiots and expendable meat. They had bet on how long it would take for the Vex to kill all the human ships at Korath Prime. The Alliance had even made plans for after humanity was extinct. They would divide human colonies among themselves and use human technology to make themselves stronger. Earth itself was already promised to the Klaxon, who wanted to use it as a breeding ground for their young. President Hayes looked around the room at the shocked faces of his advisors. These were people who had dedicated their lives to building friendships with alien species. They had believed that cooperation and trust were the keys to survival in the galaxy. Now they realized that their kindness had been seen as weakness. Admiral Grant had barely survived the battle, and her ship was one of the most damaged to return home. She stood slowly, her arm in a sling and her face pale with exhaustion. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but filled with a cold fury that made everyone listen carefully. She told them about the final moments, when she realized the truth. Her alien friends, the ones she had shared meals with and planned strategies with, had watched her people die and felt nothing. They had used her trust against her and turned her compassion into a weapon to destroy her own species. The room fell, silent as the full weight of the betrayal sank in. Humanity had been completely alone in the galaxy and never knew it. Every alien they had trusted had been planning their destruction. Every friendship had been a lie. Every alliance had been a trap. But something else was happening in that room as the truth spread. The shock and sadness were being replaced by something harder and colder. The humans who had once fought for justice and freedom were changing into something else entirely. Dr. Murphy presented her final analysis. The aliens had made one crucial mistake in their planning. They had assumed that humanity would react like other species when betrayed. They expected humans to surrender, flee, or beg for mercy like the other civilizations the Alliance had destroyed before, but the aliens did not understand humans very well. They had seen human kindness and mistaken it for weakness. They had seen human cooperation and thought it meant humans were easy to control. They had no idea what humans were capable of when they stopped caring about being good. President Hayes stood up and looked at each person in the room. His voice was calm, but everyone could hear the steel underneath his words. The time for trust and friendship was over. The time for mercy and cooperation was finished. Humanity had tried to be the good guys in the galaxy, and it had nearly gotten them all killed. Now they would try something different. They would become what their enemies had made them. And the galaxy would learn that there were some species that should never be betrayed, and some mistakes that could never be forgiven. The meeting ended with a single decision that would change everything. Humanity would disappear from the galaxy until they were ready to return. And when they came back, they would bring with them a message that every alien species would remember forever. 6 months passed without a single human voice being heard anywhere in the galaxy. The silence was so complete that it made the aliens nervous. Ships that went looking for human colonies found empty space where busy worlds had once existed. The humans had simply vanished like ghosts in the night. Commander Zeet Tar of the Klaxon felt proud at first. He had convinced himself that the silence meant humanity was extinct, just as planned. His people celebrated their victory and began making plans to claim human territory. But as weeks turned into months, strange reports started coming in from the border worlds. Trade ships disappeared along routes that had been safe for hundreds of years. One day they would send their regular check-in messages, and the next day there would be nothing but empty space. When rescue ships arrived, they found no wreckage, no bodies, and no clues about what had happened. Vex patrol fleets sent out distress signals before going completely silent. These were experienced military units with powerful weapons and strong shields, not helpless merchant vessels. Yet something was making them disappear without even time to fight back. The Vex commanders started avoiding certain areas of space entirely. The most frightening reports came from survivors who claimed to have seen ships that appeared on their sensors, but cast no shadows and made no sound. These ghost ships would appear suddenly, watch for a few minutes, and vanish again without explanation. No one could identify what species they belonged to or what they wanted. Captain Alana Davis had taken command of what remained of the human fleet. She was a quiet woman who had lost her entire family in the betrayal at Korath Prime. Now she operated from hidden bases built inside dead asteroids and abandoned star systems that no one else wanted to explore. Elena had learned important lessons from humanity's defeat. Trust was a luxury that humans could no longer afford. Honor was a weakness that enemies would exploit. The old human way of fighting with rules and mercy had nearly gotten them all killed. Now they would learn to fight, like their enemies did, without limits and without conscience. The surviving human ships had been completely rebuilt. All the bright lights and comfortable living areas were removed. The beautiful observation decks and recreational facilities were torn out to make room for weapons and surveillance equipment. These ships were no longer homes for explorers and diplomats. They were tools for war. Lieutenant Commander Paul Jenkins led the most dangerous missions deep into enemy territory. His job was to map every Alliance and Vex facility within 200 light years of Earth. He and his team moved through space like invisible predators, watching and learning about their enemies. Paul discovered things that made him understand just how badly humans had been betrayed. The aliens had detailed files on every human colony, every human leader, and every human weakness. They had studied humanity like scientists studying insects, looking for the best ways to control and eventually eliminate them. But the aliens had made one critical error. They had been so focused on human weaknesses that they had ignored human strengths. They saw human emotions as flaws to exploit, not understanding that those same emotions could fuel determination and creativity that surpassed any alien logic. During this time of silence, Elena made contact with other species that had been betrayed by the Alliance in the past. The reptilian Sarok had once been powerful warriors until the Alliance tricked them into a civil war that destroyed their civilization. The gaseous ephemera had been peaceful traders until the Alliance stole their technology and left them helpless. These meetings took place in secret, far from any trade routes or patrol paths. The betrayed species shared their knowledge and their hatred. The Sorok taught humans about biological weapons that could target specific genetic patterns. The ephemera explained how to use quantum physics to collapse entire star systems. Most importantly, these allies helped humans understand the deepest fears and cultural weaknesses of their enemies. The Klaxon were terrified of chaos and disorder. The Yorth could be driven insane by certain sound frequencies. The Neridians would die if separated from their water for too long. Dr. Helen Murphy worked with these new allies to create detailed psychological profiles of every Alliance species. She learned about their history, their religion, their art, and their nightmares. This knowledge would be more valuable than any weapon when the time came for revenge. The human spy network grew larger and more sophisticated every day. Elena's people infiltrated alien governments, joined merchant crews, and even got jobs at military bases. They were patient and careful, never taking unnecessary risks that might reveal their presence. Captain Ben Clark established hidden supply bases throughout the galaxy. These secret facilities were built inside asteroids, on airless moons, and in the empty space between star systems. Each base was stocked with weapons, fuel, and equipment for the war that was coming. The aliens began to realize that something was very wrong. Trade routes that had been safe for centuries were becoming dangerous. Military patrols were disappearing without explanation. Even worse, some survivors reported seeing human ships that should not have existed. Alliance intelligence. Agencies tried to investigate, but they found nothing concrete. Human stealth technology had advanced far beyond anything the aliens possessed. Ships could hide right next to enemy vessels without being detected. Listening posts could monitor alien communications for months without being discovered. The psychological pressure was becoming unbearable for many alien commanders. They started seeing human ships everywhere, even when their sensors showed nothing. Some began requesting transfers to safer assignments far from the border regions. Others demanded extra security for their families and homes. Commander Zakhtar tried to maintain confidence, but even he was beginning to worry. The Klaxon had always prided themselves on their logical minds and perfect planning. The idea that humans might have survived and were watching them from the shadows went against everything they believed about their own superiority. As the months of silence continued, Elena Davis felt satisfied with their progress. Her people had learned everything they needed to know about their enemies. They had built the tools and weapons necessary for what was coming. Most importantly, they had changed themselves from trusting allies into perfect instruments of revenge. The time for hiding was almost over. Soon the galaxy would learn that humanity had not died at Korath Prime. Instead, something much more dangerous had been born from the ashes of betrayal. The aliens had created their own worst nightmare, and they did not even know it yet. Elena looked at the star maps showing Alliance and Vex territory and smiled coldly. Her enemies had taught her that mercy was weakness and trust was foolishness. Now she would teach them the price of betraying humanity. The silence was about to end, and when it did, the galaxy would never be the same again. Admiral Jake Morrison now commanded the human fleet from a mobile base hidden deep in an asteroid field. The base moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be found. Inside its metal halls, humanity was preparing for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The betrayal had taught humans that conventional warfare was a game for fools. Fighting with honor and following rules had nearly gotten them all killed. If they were going to survive, they needed to become something their enemies had never encountered before. They needed to become the monsters that lived in alien nightmares. Dr. Sarah Williams led the development of new weapons that were designed not just to kill, but to terrorize. Her team worked with alien allies who had also been betrayed by the Alliance. Together, they created technologies that would make their enemies wish they had never heard of humanity. The Sorok taught humans about biological warfare. They showed them how to create diseases that would only affect specific alien species while leaving others completely unharmed. These weapons could wipe out entire planets without damaging the buildings or resources that humans might want later. Sarah's team learned to make viruses that attacked the Klaxon's shared consciousness, turning their greatest strength into a weapon against them. They developed toxins that would make the crystal bodies of the Yorth crumble into dust. They created parasites that would drain the water from Neridian bodies, leaving them to die in agony. The ephemera shared their knowledge of quantum physics, teaching humans how to make weapons that could destroy entire star systems. These devices could cause a sun to collapse or make a planet tear itself apart from the inside. The weapons were so terrible that even the ephemera were frightened by what they had helped create. Commander Lisa Grant established new training programs that transformed every surviving human into a perfect weapon of war. Gone were the days of fair fights and rules of engagement. Humans learned to strike from the shadows, to attack civilian targets that would cause maximum fear, and to use their enemies' own morality against them. The new human soldiers were taught that their enemies had no rights and deserved no mercy. Every alien civilian was a potential threat who had supported the betrayal of humanity. Every alien child would grow up to become another enemy. The only good alien was a dead alien, and humans would provide plenty of those. Captain Rick Hayes worked with resistance movements on dozens of worlds, building networks of rebels and terrorists who would strike when the signal was given. Many of these people were members of species that had been betrayed by the Alliance in the past. They wanted revenge just as badly as humans did. Rick learned to speak the languages of desperation and hatred. He promised weapons to oppressed peoples and offered them the chance to strike back at their rulers. He built an army of the angry and forgotten, people who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from chaos. The human doctrine was simple and brutal: total war without limits or mercy. Every Alliance and Vex citizen would pay for their leader's betrayal. Every world that had celebrated humanity's supposed extinction would learn the true meaning of terror. The galaxy would burn, and humans would dance in the flames. Colonel Steve Parker coordinated with sleeper agents who had been placed throughout Alliance territory during the months of silence. These agents had respectable jobs and normal lives, but they were actually human soldiers waiting for orders to begin the slaughter. Some worked as maintenance crews on space stations, with access to life support systems that could be turned into death traps. Others had jobs in food distribution centers where they could poison entire cities. Many worked in communications facilities where they could spread panic and confusion when the war began. The psychological weapons were just as important as the physical ones. Dr. Helen Murphy had studied alien cultures so thoroughly that she knew exactly how to break their spirits. She designed propaganda campaigns that would turn different alien species against each other, creating civil wars and internal conflicts. Helen learned that the Klaxon feared chaos above all else, so humans would give them chaos. The Yorth valued beauty and harmony, so humans would show them ugliness and discord. The Neridians believed in the sacred nature of water, so humans would pollute their holy springs and poison their rivers. Captain Amy Rodriguez supervised the construction of new ships designed specifically for terror attacks. These vessels looked nothing like the old human ships that had fought with honor and dignity. They were black, angular things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The new ships had no comfortable quarters or recreational facilities. Every space was dedicated to weapons, stealth equipment, or torture chambers where captured enemies could be questioned. The crews that operated these ships were no longer explorers or diplomats. They were executioners and terrorists. As the preparations neared completion, Jake Morrison felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Humanity had become everything their enemies said they were: violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. But they had also become something more. They had become survivors who would never again trust anyone but themselves. The final phase of preparation involved psychological conditioning for the human crews. Elena Davis personally supervised sessions where humans learned to suppress their natural empathy and compassion. Mercy was trained out of them like a bad habit. Guilt was removed like a tumor. These sessions were necessary because humans were not naturally cruel creatures. They had to be taught to enjoy the suffering of others. They had to learn to feel pleasure when their enemies screamed in pain. It was unnatural and horrible, but it was also necessary for survival. Lieutenant Commander Paul Jenkins completed his final intelligence reports on Alliance and Vex defenses. Every military base, every government building, every civilian target had been mapped and analyzed. Human forces knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage and maximum terror. The reports showed that the aliens had grown complacent during the months of human silence. They believed their own propaganda about human extinction. Their defenses were designed to fight conventional enemies, not the nightmare that humanity had become. Ben Clark finished preparing the logistics for the coming war. Hidden supply bases throughout the galaxy were stocked with biological weapons, quantum bombs, and torture devices. Mobile factories were ready to produce more weapons as needed. Everything was in place for a war that would reshape the galaxy. As the final preparations were completed, humanity sent a single message on all known frequencies. It was directed at both Alliance and Vex leadership, transmitted from every human ship simultaneously. The message contained no threats, no demands, and no explanations. It was just 3 words that would haunt Alien nightmares for generations to come. We are coming. The galaxy held its breath and waited. The silence was about to end, and when it did, the screaming would begin. The war that followed became known as the Terror of the Dark Fleet, though most aliens were too frightened to speak its name aloud. Humanity did not announce their return with grand battles or heroic speeches. Instead, they struck like a plague of shadows across the galaxy, bringing death and horror to worlds that had celebrated human extinction. Admiral Elena Davis coordinated the opening moves from her command ship, a black vessel that seemed to eat light itself. She had planned for this moment during every day of the long silence. Now she watched as 73 Alliance worlds became laboratories for human revenge. The attacks came without warning. Human ships appeared in orbital space around populated planets, deployed their terrible weapons, and vanished before defensive fleets could respond. Entire worlds found their populations dying from diseases that targeted specific genetic markers, found only in particular alien species. The Klaxon homeworld was the first to fall. Dr. Helen Murphy's team had created a quantum virus that attacked their shared consciousness network. The virus spread through their mental connections like wildfire, turning their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. Within hours, the most organized species in the Alliance descended into madness and chaos. Captain Ben Clark led the assault on the Yorth Crystal Cities. His ships carried harmonic weapons that vibrated at frequencies that shattered crystalline bodies from the inside out. The beautiful singing voices that had once brought joy to Alliance gatherings became screams of agony that echoed across their homeworld. For days, the Neridian water worlds suffered a different fate. Human bioweapons poisoned their sacred oceans, turning the life-giving waters into acid that burned their amphibious bodies. Those who tried to escape to land found that humans had already poisoned the groundwater. There was nowhere safe for them to hide. Meanwhile, the Vex Empire learned that their deal with the Alliance had bought them nothing but time. Human strike teams, led by veterans like Colonel Steve Parker, infiltrated Vex command centers and turned their own superweapons against them. The facility at Korath Prime, scene of humanity's greatest betrayal, became ground zero for a stellar collapse weapon that consumed 3 entire star systems. Steve Parker felt no satisfaction as he watched Vex worlds burn. The emotions had been trained out of him during the long months of preparation. He felt nothing as millions died, no more than a farmer feels when killing insects that threaten his crops. The aliens had made themselves into vermin, and vermin deserved extermination. The psychological warfare proved even more effective than the physical attacks. As news of humanity's methods spread throughout the galaxy, Alliance and Vex forces began surrendering rather than face the possibility of encountering human ships. Some worlds evacuated entirely upon receiving reports that human scouts had been spotted in their systems. Captain Amy Rodriguez commanded a squadron that specialized in terror tactics. Her ships would appear over civilian populations and broadcast recordings of tortured alien prisoners begging for mercy that never came. The psychological impact was devastating, causing panic and despair that spread faster than any weapon. The aliens discovered that their own propaganda had worked against them. For months they had told their people that humans were extinct, that the threat was over. Now those same people felt betrayed by their own leaders when the dead humans returned with weapons beyond their worst nightmares. Commander Lisa Grant took personal command of the assault on Alliance military academies. These schools had trained the officers who planned humanity's betrayal. Now they became examples of what happened to those who crossed humanity. The cadets and instructors were given a choice: broadcast their surrender and confess their species' crimes, or watch their families die slowly. Most chose to confess. The broadcast spread throughout Alliance space, showing proud alien warriors, reduced to weeping, broken creatures begging for forgiveness. The psychological impact destroyed military morale across dozens of worlds. Rick Hayes coordinated with the resistance movements he had built during the silent months. Across the galaxy, oppressed peoples rose up against their alliance rulers. But these were not noble revolutions fighting for freedom. They were massacres fueled by hatred and equipped with human weapons. Designed for maximum cruelty, the rebels had been taught human methods of warfare. They targeted civilian populations, poisoned water supplies, and used torture as both a weapon and entertainment. The galaxy burned with civil wars as species that had been allies for centuries turned on each other with inhuman savagery. Lieutenant Commander Paul Jenkins led deep strikes against Alliance cultural centers. Museums, libraries, and art galleries were destroyed along with the irreplaceable treasures they contained. Human forces wanted to erase not just alien lives, but alien history and culture as well. The message was clear. Civilizations that betrayed humanity would be wiped from existence as if they had never been. Their art, their literature, their music, and their philosophy would disappear forever. Future generations would not even know these species had ever existed. Dr. Sarah Williams deployed her most terrible creation on the Vex, Capital World. The weapon was a modified version of their own stellar collapse technology, but designed to work slowly. The planet's population had weeks to watch their sun gradually dying, knowing that nothing could save them and that their suffering was deliberate. Vex leadership tried to negotiate, offering to return stolen human technology and pay reparations for their crimes. The human response was simple: no prisoners, no negotiations, no mercy. The time for words had ended at Korath Prime. Now there would be only consequences. Within 18 months, the Galactic Unity Alliance had collapsed into 13 separate warring factions. Former allies fought each other with the same weapons they had once used against the Vex. Trust had become impossible when any species might be working with the humans, or might be the next target for human revenge. The Vex Empire retreated to their core worlds, abandoning their outer territories. Rather than defend them against human attacks they could not predict or counter. Their mighty fleets, once the terror of the galaxy, hid in deep space and prayed that the humans would not find them. Commander Paul Jenkins delivered the final message to the surviving leaders of both civilizations. It was broadcast from the ruins of the Alliance Capital World, with the burning remains of their Grand Council chambers visible in the background. His voice was calm and cold as he spoke words that would be remembered for 1,000 years. You wanted humanity gone from the galaxy. Your wish has been granted. We are no longer the species you betrayed. We are what you made us. We are your punishment for the crime of thinking you could destroy us without consequences. He paused, letting the cameras focus on the destruction around him. Alien bodies lay scattered in the ruins, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and agony. The smell of death and burning filled the air. We want you to remember something every time you look up at the stars and wonder if we are watching you. We told you to run. You should have listened. The broadcast ended, but the message was clear. The galaxy had learned that there were some lines that should never be crossed and some species that should never be underestimated. Humanity had tried to be the good guys, tried to build friendships and alliances based on trust and cooperation. But the aliens had taught them that goodness was weakness and trust was foolishness. Now humanity had become something else entirely, something that would make the galaxy remember the price of betrayal for generations to come. The war was over, but the fear would never end. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human ships were watching and waiting. The aliens had created their own monsters, and now they would live with the consequences forever. In the end, humanity had kept their promise. They had told their enemies to run, and those who survived would spend the rest of their lives doing exactly that.